we just figured out, I think with Nick, I looked at the list of talks and there was nothing specific for Gen AI, so we thought we might as well throw something in. We call it Let's Chat. Maybe we should have called it Let's Bard, but anyway, here we are. So quick introductions. Nathaniel, you've met them already. Co-founder, I'll introduce you all a little bit quicker. Co-founder, CTO at Sturdy. We have Max, co-founder, head of engineering at Boombax. Ottoman, principal scientist, data scientist at Spectrum. Josh, CTO, founder at Spectrum. And Pankaj, founder at Markov. All right, and myself. Let's start with a quick round, very like lightning, yes, no answer. Start from there. ChatGPT.
No. Oh, sorry.
It's good. It's good. GPT-4. Is it going to pass the Turing test?
No.
Okay.
No.
Probably no.
I'll say yes unless they redefine it.
Okay.
No.
All righty. So we have a majority. No, everybody is familiar with the Turing test. What do you explain the Turing test, Josh?
Basically, if you chat with someone, I think it's 15 minutes, you have to convince them that you're talking to a human. And the challenge there is it's a human. It's not actually an adult, well-educated human. So I think there's a little bit of fuzziness.
There's a wiggle room.
There's a lot of wiggle room.
Yeah, you can decide where that human comes from on the planet.
Yeah. Could be a 3-year-old.
Good. All righty. Here's another question. When was the last time you remember you prompted ChatGPT or your LLMs of choice for any prompt? What was the prompt? What was the answer, and what was your reaction to the answer? Okay. And while you're thinking about it for a moment, I'll say that I tried. So I wanted to go for a run this morning. So I asked ChatGPT and Bard, because I'm fair. I wanted to see that. Where should I go run? I said I want to go for a run 3-5, so between 3 and 5 miles. I said where I'm staying, and I said I wouldn't mind seeing some nice things around New Orleans. Bard was kind of iffy. Mostly it said go search in Google. And then it offered a 3 and a 5 mile run. It didn't offer a 4. ChatGPT actually offered the 3, a 4, and a 5 mile options. And it looked very good. It was extremely confident. It came back like, I know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, oh, wow, great, I'll do this. But then last night, after I'd done that, I opened the map and actually traced the thing. And I'm like, why is it taking me this direction? I'm not going to do that. And I did Google, and there was 2 websites dedicated to running in New Orleans. And they offered great stuff, information. And I went and followed one of those. But as I was walking out the door this morning, I asked the lady, hey, where should I go run? I want to run along the Mississippi River. And her answer was exactly what ChatGPT gave me. So go figure. Maybe the locals know something I don't. Anyway, start with you again.
I wish I could remember a specific, but I do, aside from messing with prompts for within our product and get some summaries and some insights out, I ask very pointed questions, often about Postgres. And it's one of those things, I think that one of the reasons it doesn't do well, there's a cool chart I saw of tests that GPT is doing well on, and coding is not one of them, is probably because it's always a little bit wrong. But I do find that I get an insight of, oh, I could do it that way. It's wrong, I know it's wrong, but I could do that, and that would be better, actually, than what I was thinking. So I use it for that all the time.
So programming.
Yeah, pretty much, that's it, yeah.
On my end, it's been mostly for what we built in product recently. I was showing this to Ayush 2 hours ago, I think. So, I mean, I can talk about this. That's fine.
Yeah. So what?
So basically, the way we integrated it was to allow musicians to input like what they want, what they're working on, and generate some inspiration for them with like chord progressions and or lyrics. Like there's like several integrations that the team has put together, and we've been demoing that shit to investors a lot recently. They're all like super big eyes. Oh, that's great. Yeah, so I was showing this to Ayush, and every time I run it, like. I have enough, waiting for 20 seconds. Like GPT-3.5 is super slow, and I feel OpenAI is like they do something. ChatGPT is way too fast compared to what they allow us to do. I feel like they want to keep the upper end on that. So that's always my first reaction. And then when we get the results, like, okay, well, that's working well. That's fair enough. But yeah, that's the most recent experience. Though I did play with Brat GPT.
Bard.
Have you tried Brat GPT?
Brat?
Yeah, it's just like a fake bot like this, where it's like super snarky and it's going to it's telling you that it's going to take over the world, and like you can't mess with it. It's just like always shouting at you and insulting you. So it's a good refresher.
Nice.
So for me, actually, it's from this morning. So I had my summary slide of a talk I'm giving after this, and I was trying to just get the gist of what I was going to talk to, like essentially. Like in 2 or 3 words, summarize for me what I'm doing. And I was like, kept getting stuck on what I want to say exactly. And I was, let me try ChatGPT. So this was it this morning. I copy-pasted few contents from some of the slides, and then I asked it, here, summarize, I want 3 points, and each point give me 3 sub-points about what I have discussed.
That's a summary.
Essentially a summary of a summary. And you will see them in my slides later. I mean, it was. I mean, you have to tweak. So the point is, it gets you unstuck, and then it always gives you at least like a starting point. So you stare, like you don't have to stare essentially at an empty page. And I think this is where I find essentially the tool very useful, is that you may not take what it takes completely, but it gives you a good starting point for whatever you want to do. So it's really inspirational, and it sparks ideas for you to kind of get the juice flowing and get started.
Yeah, so I think the last one I tried was, I was asking it for competitor intel, because I was just curious, like, how much do you know about this? And you get like an overview and a place to go, but it was, I think, especially with GPT, the limitation of 2019 or whatever it is, really limiting when you're in like an early tech space.
Yeah.
But prior to that, I think I'd asked it some questions about Docker and like how do I do X, Y, and Z. And the answers were wrong, but good enough that I could ask it again, and I would get to something that actually looked right. But I had to know basically the shape of the thing that I wanted, or I wasn't going to get to the right answer. But it was still helpful. Like I don't have to go look through the documentation for whatever.
Did you try Bard for the recent stuff?
Yeah, I just have them both open at the same time.
And it still couldn't do the.
I did okay.
Circa 2023.
Oh no, it did. The answers were slightly better, but got really generic pretty fast. Rather than talking about, I won't name the competitor, but rather than talking about like what the competitor's capabilities are in a certain space, it was a lot more generic. Like this is kind of what you want to do in this area, and I was like, all right, cool. I already know that. I'm trying to get
I like that in Bard the first option is Google it.
Yeah, the Google it button is actually really helpful. It gets me a pretty good query.
Exactly.
I also use UChat a bit, but not quite there. But it's pretty good. They just launched a new version, so.
Nice. Pankaj.
In the morning, used it to refine my pitch for Markov.
Really? This morning?
This morning, yeah, sitting there, waiting for my turn and just.
But did it help you distill it, or?
I mean, it gave some good ideas, but that was it.
Fantastic. All right. So end of lightning round. Let's get into a little bit more nitty-gritty. So the ChatGPT. So I mean, just a little bit, right? So we call Gen AI all the. It's a subset of AI, right? Where the algorithms are actually generating things. It could be text, could be a picture, could be, and so on. Traditionally, we have 2 types of gen historically. One is GANs. They were the first types that came out, the generative adversarial network, where we had 2 networks working, one generating, one classifying based on that. And then we have the more recent ones, which are the GPT family, right, which are all using this transformer kind of model. So Ottoman, can you explain transformers to a high schooler?
How much time do I have?
Well, there's 36 minutes, I think, left to the
All
end,
right.
but let's not use all of it.
So the transformers are essentially a neural network architecture that are primarily geared towards processing sequences, and it can be a sequence of tokens of text or audio or whatever. But the basic idea, essentially, it builds on. It tried to solve two problems that we ran into in previous architectures. The previous sequence learners, as the sequence of words got longer, the learning process became harder. So words in context in the beginning of a sentence gets a much lower weight compared to words that come after. And generally, when you are speaking, the full context of the sentence matters. And knowing which words are more important than others is particularly very important. So what transformers did, they essentially introduced this mechanism by which we can essentially compute correlations between words. Every word in the sentence is correlated with every other word. And so this is the first idea, this attention idea, so the first kind of breakthrough. The second one is we are able to do these in parallel. So traditionally, you would need to take the input from every sequence in your input and wait until you process all the tokens in the input before you start generating the next stage. But what transformers is that you parallelize the whole process so that you can take advantage of modern architectures like GPUs, like hardware architectures. So that made it a lot faster. And then the third thing is this third component of a transformer is this encoder-decoder infrastructure. So if you are given essentially a long piece of text and you want to summarize it, typically what you would need to do is just read the whole essentially text and then kind of abstract it in your mind and then start summarizing it, right? So that's kind of what the idea of a transformer does, this encoder-decoder infrastructure where it just processes the whole text very fast and then starts generating. I can talk about the training because that's very important.
Yeah, so let's summarize. So 3 things so far I heard is attention units, which helps you understand the long relationship between words. Parallelism, which is do everything in parallel rather than one at a time. And this idea of a encoder-decoder, right, which helps you learn because it's unsupervised and you could do it at scale.
Exactly, yeah. So then the question is, how do you train these things? So the basic idea is you just pass to it essentially large amounts of data, raw data. And you use the data you pass to it as a signal for your learning process. So you'd mask, so there are many ways of doing it, but one of the ways is you would mask some parts of the input and then let the model predict what that masked piece token is. And then penalize it if it gets it wrong, reward if it gets it right. So for example, you would say the sky is, so that will be the input, and then the model, initially it's random weight, so it will predict, for example, chair. The sky is chair doesn't make sense, so you penalize it until it starts getting, okay, the sky is gray, the sky is blue, the sky, and then that's how it starts embedding meaning into these tokens. And when you do this, I mean, it seems simple, but this is the core of language models, is that when you do this with trillions of tokens, large amounts of data that pass through these systems, multiple times, the model starts learning correlations between words, context, meaning, and these abstractions start building up where when you talk to it, at the end of the day, it's really just a lookup based on what you gave it, what is the most likely token that will come next. At the end of the day, that's all it's doing. But because it has seen all human knowledge that is in text form, it starts developing this idea, or it seems as if it has a real understanding of meaning, but it doesn't. It's just seeing based on everything that came before, what's the most likely tokens that comes next. And it is probabilistic in nature, meaning that not 2 generations will give you the exact same thing. It's really like if you generate enough, you will get different responses every time. So that's in a nutshell. I don't know if it's the level of a high school student, but...
So you just got a class in Transformers in 6 minutes. I think that's impressive. All right, so let's... another important... There's a lot of these terms that are going to come up. Gen AI, of course, is the umbrella one, but one of them is prompt engineering. And since this is an engineering conference, we should spend a moment on prompt engineering. Max, what is prompt engineering?
Oh, wow.
Why should we care?
So prompt engineering. So when you talk to GPT, you have to give it instructions, right? So you can like, hey, what color is the sky? Well, that's just a basic you ask questions, right? How many of you use LinkedIn? Probably all of you. About 2 months ago, we have people, oh, this is what you can do with GPT. Now those posts are like 100 tips. You have to set the tone, you have to set the output, 100 tips of what kind of questions you have to do. And people like, iterating and trying to find the right way to ask the right question. Like back in the day, this was how we were Googling, if you remember. You were like, oh, if you had those quotes and this and that, you were like tweaking the things. Now you're trying to do this, and Google's like, fuck it, I'm going to send you whatever I want. But prompt engineering is really iterating on the way you ask the question, not as much what you're asking for, but the way you ask the question. There are ways today to actually take this work of iterating on these prompts to have part of it is provided by you as, say, a product, and the rest is provided by the user. We've built this recently in our product, and there's a hackathon, productathon, whatever you want to call it, tomorrow on that, where you can like play around and try to build those prompts. What's coming up now, if I want to extend the question a bit, you have people starting to automate prompt engineering. So you have bots creating prompts and iterating and getting the results and going. And so like it's not baby GPT yet, right? Like it's around like really getting better prompts by iteration faster that we can type. So what prompt engineering is today is mostly iterating. What prompt engineering will be in, what, 2-3 months from now, 6 months from now, it's going to be probably different. But yeah, that's what it is.
It's incredible, right? The speed at which we take one interface and then turn it into a system and then turn it into automation of the system. It's just remarkable. Anybody else wants to comment on? Yeah.
Sure. So I went to Graycroft hosted, it's one of our investors, hosted an event where OpenAI discussed the product. And the one interesting thing about prompt engineering that I keep thinking about is, you're automating it with bots, and there's obviously like a whole bunch of incentive from OpenAI, and they made that pretty clear to sort of ingest the prompt engineering stuff. So it's an interesting, not really maybe a long-term moat.
Yeah. For OpenAI.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, if you're building on top of it and your mode is, it's challenging.
Yeah. All right. Any other comment?
I just have one that's kind of fun. It will talk in pirate voice if you ask it to, and if you get it just right, you can get it to be really surly in its responses, which is just fun.
Fantastic. All right. Pankaj, kind of related, right? Now, JSD was mentioning the other day, right? Like if you look at the news now, it looks like every day one of the big players, the Googles, the Facebook, the Databricks, the whatever comes out with another LLM, and they all, some of them with names that make sense, some of them less, but there's all that work going on. But behind the scene, and I don't know how many folks here understand that, behind the scene, the open source community has, over the last 3 months, I want to say, has just exploded. Yeah, there you go. Annihilated a lot of advances. And I'll just point a couple of things, and then we can go into the details. But one of the biggest moats that was claimed that companies like OpenAI and Google have is about the infrastructure. Right? It takes millions of dollars to train an LLM, right? And sure, technology will make it cheaper and cheaper, but by the time we get there, there's going to be a lot more parameters. So they can always push the envelope. And it looked like they're going to have that moat on the LLM generation. Well, the open source community said, well, that's interesting. Let's invent a technique in which I can retrain LLMs for $100 or for $50. And they iterated. You could see the commits there in the repo. And within 6 weeks, they came up with that. So open source community have basically broke one of the key moats that these big companies have, to the point where Google and inside Google, folks are like, what the heck, we've been disrupted. Pankaj, you want to tell us a little bit more of what's happening there? These concepts like LORA and other ideas.
I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like all these big companies have created these foundations, which open source community are building upon. It's hard is coming up with. with all these things, like coming up with these architectures, coming up with what are the limitations of the current infrastructure, for example. I think one of the things that we are forgetting, like when these big companies are saying that we have a moat on the infrastructure, they're talking about scale. And when open source is talking about, they're talking about, can I run it on my laptop? There's a big difference between the two. And the generalization problem still exists, but that doesn't mean that there are not strides. There are strides happening. And it's because there are like very smart people sitting all across the globe having very specific problems that they are dealing with. And humans by nature have figured out a way to solve their own problems, building upon what is known and figuring out what is unknown. So I see a lot of these innovations that are going to happen. I think just yesterday a new company was launched by Munjal Shah. It's Hippocratic.ai, which is building an LLM for health. Right? It's built upon the technology of GPTs, which was actually built by Google, and again, which was basically formulated based on LSTMs and LSTMs and RNNs before that, which again came from research that was done in 1990s. So there will be these progresses happening across the domains for solving specific problems and taking the humanity forward.
Amazing. So, I mean, here's some examples. So one of them is the low
rank approximation.
Low rank adaptation, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is the one way that open source community figured out a way of how to augment. So you have an LLM in this example, right?
I'll add to it. So that low rank adaptation came from Microsoft research, because they had a problem of actually. So the problem is, how can you take these billions of parameters, 175 billion parameter GPT, and before that it was like hundreds of millions of parameters. Every time you want to train it for a specific task, you have to train these billions of parameters over multiple hours, multiple days. It's not scalable. So what they did is something they took from like classical machine learning. So in machine learning, people who are working in high dimensional machine learning, there's a low rank approximation of a matrix, which is like SVDs, eigenvalues, PCAs, like which are common. Like you take a high dimensional space and reduce into a lower dimension. They took the same concept and applied it on LLMs. So the idea is, out of these 175 billion parameters, if I am doing summarization, not all 175 billion are being updated. So why can't I keep the weights of this large LLM, like 175 billion, I'm talking about GPT-3, constant, and actually have an approximate network, which is basically a bunch of matrices. Because all these complex neural networks are basically matrices. So if you understand basic algebra, you understand everything that you need to know. So they are just a bunch of matrices, which are low rank approximation. Low rank means that every row in that matrix is independent. Means they are contributing to some outcome. So they just approximated it. And now you're just combining these together at the end. So what you need to do is just train this small network, which can be done cheaply, fast, and then kind of plug it off and plug it in based on the problem. So if you're doing summarization, take it off. If you're doing question answering, plug it back in, like specific one. And it reduced two things. One, the complexity of building these systems, and second, the cost. And that's what, my hunch is that a lot of these fine-tunings that these OpenAIs and Azures provide, they are built on that. And it was done in 2016 by Microsoft.
Yeah, so the technique was in 2016, but it really caught fire now. So basically, the advances from here on LLM, not everybody's going to have to go to, is that okay? We'll have to go to, doesn't matter. We'll have to go back to first principle and build their own LLMs, but rather the LLMs is going to be commoditized, and now these extra low rank task-oriented models are going to be add-on that you can have and have proprietary. That's quite interesting. It's okay, I don't think, I'm more about it. So here's another kind of question to the panel, whoever wants to answer. But so we went, before the internet, obviously there's no technology companies. So internet comes around and it's all open, right? Everybody can contribute, we build it like that. Mobile was built when there were already existing technology companies. So mobile, there's really two flavors, Android and iOS, and they kind of joined and owned by them and ran by them. So internet versus mobile. What would AI be? Would AI be more of the, the kahunas are owning the world, or are we going to flip back to more of an open source, open community kind of world? Go.
Well, yeah, so you guys maybe all saw the Congress yesterday with Sam Altman when he said, let's make people register and get a license to create LLMs. So that question's interesting. Do they actually have the authority, or will they just all get made somewhere else? It's another interesting follow-up question. So I suspect that it will be, well, that's a really interesting one because it's totally counter to democratizing AI.
That's right.
But, or maybe it's not, I don't know. But there is licensing in democracy. But the thing that I think is interesting is the ability to take large language models that are open source, because they're pretty freaking good right now, and apply them to a very large number of specialized tasks. I don't see that like, I don't see the AGI being the one solution that's just so much better. It feels like there's always, in search and in other problems, there's always more juice to be had on specialized data than there is in a generic solution. Even if you think about, like, I take Yakov, who's, one of the smartest people I know, and I have him keep score for me in darts, and he sucks at it, So there's always, like, some specialized knowledge that are really interesting.
Yeah. Anybody else wants to have a crack at,
Well, I mean, I would, that leaked memo from Google, I think, would be an answer to that question.
Right.
That's what I've been going on recently. The commoditization is just so fast that I think there are going to be a lot of choices.
Yeah, so I think we all, this is the trade-off, like Josh said. Like, do we want to see a world where, like in the internet, there's the Linux community and the open source community basically maintain this fantastic, for the better of everybody, or is it going to be more like the mobile?
In 2010, there's a famous quote by Anderson, Mark Anderson, like, software is going to eat the world. I always say AI is going to run the world. So this is going to and this is already happening. Like, you have smartphones, you have smart thermostats, like all these transportation, everything is managed by machinery. You have drones, you have autonomous cars. So yeah, world is going to be run by AI. Now we are talking about making it a commodity. Models are going to be the commodity. What is not going to be the commodity is this proprietary data. Like Google, when they launched TensorFlow, it was free for anybody in 2015. What they didn't give is their proprietary data sets. Working at Alexa AI, I can see like how much data Amazon has and what can be done with it. What they open source is the code, which is basically, for all practical purposes, unless you have data, it's useless, right?
But okay, so let me push back a little bit. So in a world where you need the data to train the model, you're right. So if I need to build the LLM from scratch, I need the data. But if what is leaked is a trained model, remember the parameters are already encoding all the data that was fed in.
Yeah, and then that data is like a lot of irrelevant information that may not be useful for your case, and that's exactly what ChatGPT is doing right now. Right, the biggest problem with GPT series, GPT-1, GPT-2 was like these hallucinations. One, the second part is you ask a very specific question, it gives you a totally different answer. You just ask it, what is a bank? And it will give you a totally different answer based on, who is prompting what. Yeah. Now, is it useful? And again, Max brought up 20 seconds to get the answer. And if the answer is wrong, then he has to again wait 20 seconds. So the question is, yes, the technology exists, but is it useful to solve my problem? So a lot of progress and a lot of innovations is going to happen in, can it solve my problem? And one of the solutions is the improvement in infrastructure and the overall architecture itself, which is more algorithmic to process the information faster, which is like low rank approximation, like innovations like that. The second thing is training it with proprietary data so that whatever I get is relevant for solving my problems.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, let's change gears. So.
Strongly agree.
The next thing is, we're all here in bringing it back to engineering and technical things. Josh, what are the biggest engineering challenges you see that are kind of distinct to LLMs coming up? You know, what's my future stack going to have to look like now that I need to deal with LLMs as well? Is it different, really? With training, inference, what's the difference?
So I think the training use case is really interesting. I feel like that's going to there's going to be some interesting competition in that space where people are providing like nice tools for training and specialized training especially. Like if you go look at, I'm not going to name any competitors or semi-competitors. So, but if you go look at some of the things that are out there for training in particular, you can go like full open source and grab whatever they're using. You can go with Hugging Face, which is sort of like a little bit GitHub-y, but like some other stuff. Like there's really a lot of options around that. I've tried to buy the enterprise version of Hugging Face before. I won't disclose anything about price. But there's a lot of interesting options around that. I think that's going to shake out fairly soon, where there's a pretty good option for. In the open source, you mean? I think there'll be an open source one, and there's a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of interesting things around making the open source thing usable. I think that's all coming, right? So and like people are doing that. Yeah, like fine tuning. I think you sent me the H2O AI and some others. Where there's some people working on it, and they're going to want to work in the open, but there's still some value add. And I think there's a lot of things that come over from the database world in that space too, where like Redis has the kind of private Redis and Elasticache and the Elastic. There's going to be some stuff like that for sure, and then there's going to be like a pure proprietary tier. Or like, do I just want to build on OpenAI? They said they're going to open source some model or something soon, but I'll wait till I see what that is. But there's to a very large extent to me to make this problem really opaque is it depends on what problem you're trying to solve with the model. If your primary thing, and I think I said this in Slack a week ago or something, if your primary thing is that the chat is a small feature on a big thing that you're doing, sort of like I want to ask, I'm trying to find something inside the platform. How do I do this in your platform? Then like ChatGPT or OpenAI's API or something like that makes a lot of sense. I think if your core competency is inferencing, in my case, then building on top of ChatGPT or on OpenAI actually is probably not the right move. However, learning from it, makes a ton of sense. So I've wavered a lot. That was training. I think inference, and that kind of bundles together, right? Like if it's proprietary, inferencing is kind of baked into training. On the inferencing side, again, really depends on the use case you have and what kind of performance you got to get to. If really slow inferencing, I think we were talking about 20 seconds. If 20 seconds is fast enough for you, then you can probably use like off-the-shelf hosted thing. And if you need, 10 milliseconds or something like that, you're probably going to be doing some pretty advanced crap to make that happen. But it's the same situation with data processing and whatnot. Like if you don't need the data processing to happen extremely fast or at incredible scale, someone told me that the thing about Snowflake was that basically it got de-skilled a lot of MapReduce, right? Not really, but it's kind of like Hive as a service is the way Bryce described it anyways, which I think is pretty apt. The idea of running petabyte scale like we did at Crux on Snowflake is terrifying from a cost perspective. So there's always like an interesting, there's always some interesting trade-off.
Yeah, the off-road option you got to do if you...
Exactly. Yeah. Don't only go off-road if you have to, but sometimes you need to go off-road.
That's right. Anybody else wants to add on the technology challenges of LLMs?
I mean, to me, there is lots of literature and movement around experimentation with these large language models, but there isn't a lot of literature about how you deploy these. Yeah. There are two challenges. One is the cost of serving these large language models. They eat a lot of GPU power, and we don't have enough GPUs generally that are high-end, that are designed for inferencing at the scales to serve like millions of billions of users.
NVIDIA store.
Yeah, basically. So like the...
Go along with so you heard it here.
The cost in terms of like hardware resources and then like inferencing time also continue to play. But yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, whenever I hear about this thing, it comes, there's a image from IBM shipping the first 5 MB hard drive that comes to my mind. It's a big truck loading that 5 MB drive, and there are like dozens of people pushing it. And we are in 2023. I think a lot of innovations is happening in the infrastructure, and everyone is right. We are far more advanced as a civilization we were in 1940s. We will be far more advanced like in like next few years. And the innovation that has happened in the last 2 years, it's phenomenal. If you look at like there are like tools like Deep Speed. There are tools like, I think there's one more, I forgot, Accelerate from Hugging Face. So these two things itself, like it's multiple X improvement in reduction in training and reduction in cost. So I think, and the new thing that I'm hearing is like they are also going to support AMD now for these, so which is a bigger player with GPU.
By AMD too.
Yeah, and that's why it's going up.
Along NVIDIA and AMD.
Yeah, yeah. So the point is like it's, and I've heard like Tesla already is using AMD chips now. So the point is, it's going to accelerate. The question is not about how. I mean, is it a matter of months? Is it a matter of weeks? It's a matter of years. I mean, that's debatable, but I think it's going to happen. And I'm pretty sure like, I mean, I read it somewhere, like in 2030, like the cost of training something like GPT-3 will be less than $30. And I'm more optimistic it will be less than 20.
Yeah.
One very quick follow-up. So also there's a ton of pressure on, I mean, it's not just the hardware improving, but there's a ton of pressure on Hugging Face has talked about like, okay, I think I can get almost the same signal with fewer parameters. So long as someone's coming back and doing like garbage collection on the size of these models, right, where GPT-4, the rumor is 1 trillion parameters or something ridiculous. Like as long as someone's coming along and doing garbage collection essentially and compressing these over and over again, like you're going to get to, it's going to get easier.
Oh yeah, and that's happening. I mean, that's part of how they got to $100 or lower in the open community is by building, models that are using, that's the other advance, LLMs that are a fraction of the number of parameters that's showing 96, 97% equivalent kind of performance. So you can give up 3% of performance for like a 10x, 100x acceleration everywhere.
Yeah,
it's probably good enough.
Yeah, with neural nets, there was that paper a few years ago called The Lottery or something like
That's
that.
right.
It was basically, they would look at the network and see how much benefit and how much the weights were changing over time.
Incremental,
and just pull the crap out.
Yeah.
So that's going to happen. And I think the task-specific nature of it also really influences what you can do, right? Like if in our case, like classification inference, you can really optimize the crap out of it if you want to.
Yeah. Cool. Let's change gears from the,
I have a question I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on.
Yeah.
So there's been some serious concern from, I don't know, sort of names in the space. One for example is I think his name is Eliezer Yudowski. Yeah. Basically doomsayers, like AI is going to result in the death of us all or something. Yeah. I'm just curious to hear the panel's thoughts.
We're going to get to that in a moment. Don't get into that. Yeah, that's great. Well, that's the next topic. So I just want to close a little bit on the practical side, and then we'll change to humanity ending tomorrow. Just the boring mundane things. So this is so Josh, you spoke about and others here on the side of training and the heavy duty of the technology, but there's also aspects of Gen AI that will impact applications, right? So maybe Nathaniel, maybe you can. How do you think about taking this new toy and playing around with it in an application? What's the framework that you have in embedding Gen AI in an application kind of sense?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we just started with immediately is ChatGPT is my proxy, by the way, for anything LLM. So I just always say ChatGPT. Sometimes I say LLM, but is that I know it doesn't understand anything, but I'm going to use that word too. The understanding of context is amazing, and so the summarization is amazing. And for us in particular, we have a lot of conversations, and it's really helpful to be able to summarize them, but we also have a lot of metadata that we've built on top of that. So we have our own models that feed into that, so we can actually, it's not just, hey, summarize this email and click a button in Gmail or something like that. We have the signals around that know importance, and so we can summarize up into account levels. How is this customer doing, or how are all the enterprise accounts doing at a more natural language level, rather than the analytics and reporting sort of level, I think.
So would that be, so from an application perspective, there is now the opportunity to take, to refine the user experience, the UX if you like, from more of a, I don't know how you would summarize it in the past, it would have had to be in some chart or some.
I mean, yeah, and we have analytics and we have charts and graphs, and you can see how these signals are firing over time and everything. But from that, without some kind of a report and a CSV and reading through it, or it's hard to get a bigger picture. So it will let you get to a bigger picture. We're not totally there yet, but I'm convinced it's going to work for that.
That's amazing. So now you can have a one sentence at the top you would need to know.
Or, and some of my prompt engineering is playing with, give me one sentence and also give me 5 sentences, and then I can just get them back and use them any way I want later on as well.
So yeah, that's good. Anybody else wants to comment on applications here?
Yeah, just a quick thought. I think a lot of people look at the, GPT as an input-output thing. And the fact that the way they went out with the chat function, so you can actually talk to it and iterate, I think people are taking this for granted now. So, I mean, we implemented it recently in our products. Like, it has to be conversational. It can't be just like, oh, write your thing, here's the output, here you go, right? You have to be able to iterate. People expect that. And I think this is something that was not really there before, that they bringing in on top of the, everything it knows. And I think that whether you use LLM or not, I think more and more apps will be more conversational without being like, Alexa, do X, or Google, do this. Like, even with text, have that kind of interaction.
So you think UX is going to go through, user experience is going to go through some form of rethink now in the face of that?
I mean,
we build apps differently.
Clip is coming back, but in a very different way.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and I see that as the next step after sort of the higher level, being able to see across more data, is that kind of chat capability to it.
Yeah, just briefly, one of the most interesting use cases I can imagine for LLMs in the future, having worked in in a adjacent security space as a policy researcher, is sort of, here's a bunch of one use case I had. We were working with, I can't give you any details. We were working with DARPA. We had captured some documents that might contain information about chemical weapons usage in Iraq, and we wanted to find that information so that we could back up some case, that we're a research center, that's what you do.
Yeah.
Like, teach the LLM these documents and ask it where the heck it is. Really, really, really interesting, and definitely an iterative thing.
Yep.
But that's a user interface to those documents, right?
Yep. Fantastic. All right, we're running out of time. I do want to touch, there's I think we could have had 2 more hours and still wouldn't cover everything. But just to satisfy the doomsday kind of, crowd pleasing, let's start here, and this is open to the whole panel, right? Let's start with employment. That's one of the things, right? Are we all going to be out of jobs soon, right? So specifically, would you recommend your kid study computer science?
Well, they can do whatever they want, but if they ask me, I would say yes, maths and computer science for sure.
So you think they'll still be programming?
I think there's a difference between the two. Computer science is not programming. It's about teaching computers and knowing more about computers. And mathematics is, I always feel mathematics is the language of nature. So if they know it, they know enough to be dangerous and successful. So it's not about, I think programming is just one aspect.
Yeah. And I'm being facetious here a little bit, but it's not just computer science, but in general, what are the professions we're not going to have anymore?
Sure. Well, okay, so I'll do the computer science really quick. So my son, probably not, he seems more interested in art. But my daughter, we'll see, she's a year old. I would say, I think you're still programming, right? Even at a distance. I think the GUI-based programming like Scratch and whatnot maybe becomes a lot more powerful, or it becomes more, you know what I mean? Because you still want deterministic output to some extent. So to some extent, you're still going to be programming. But I don't, the de-skilling of it obviously is an interesting factor. Other jobs that I think are going to go away. I think some of the worst jobs might go away or be a lot smaller. I feel like they're sort of de-skilled, but also you can centralize it more, so the decision maker in that job is actually more powerful. And I think of that like we were talking about RevOps earlier. it's not a super great analogy, but in the RevOps space, like the mechanization of all the RevOps stuff meant that you needed fewer people doing that stuff, right? Or you didn't have each salesperson filling out little checkboxes after every meeting. So I think there'll be a lot of stuff like that. In my particular space, like content moderators, I feel like will become more powerful, and you won't have to hire an army of people in, like all the problems that were published about 5 years ago from Facebook. Right?
Yep.
You won't have to deal with that as much. But eventually you still need to go debug the thing.
Yeah, we're running out of time. We're running out of time.
Right. Very quick. I like who wrote that tweet like earlier, a couple months ago, saying that the most common or immersion programming language is English. I mean, there is a lot of truth to that in the sense that, I mean, there will be a lot of changes in terms of how you do things, but the main things that I think is impacted is efficiency. You will be able to do more things faster. Now, it will cut some jobs eventually, but I still think that the human component, creative component is still needed. The design component will still be needed. Again, these language models are, at the end, they are dummy. Like, they don't have the background understanding of why you're doing something. They are trying to mimic and imitate what they've seen or what they've learned. So I don't think creativity is going to be dead with large language models. But yeah.
Quick hot take. I'm more worried about TikTok than LLMs on humanity. But there's part of it, I mean, tied to this is, the same way people have taken internet being source of truth of everything. Like, I remember when internet came along, I was like, wait, that's great, right? Like, all this knowledge, we're going to tap into it, we're going to have this on our phones and all, that's amazing, everybody's going to be so much smarter. And I don't think it's really panned out, hence TikTok. And so I think there's part of this where I'm more worried about people taking whatever coming out of ChatGPT as source of truth and like losing even more of the critical thinking. So I'm more worried about those aspects because that's like more foundational, like, that's going to affect every part of the life. Sure, like every new technology affects jobs, like some of the stuff we do in our companies affect people's jobs too, right? But it's more like this an invisible effect on that. So if you ask me what I want my kids to do, like whatever the hell they want, because climate change, like, yeah, whatever, have fun, have fun.
Good luck.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much second that. All of that. I'm not philosophical enough to look that far into the future, but I think initially it's going to be that critical thinking piece, and people who know how to use it will be more efficient. And I wouldn't make predictions about job security. I don't know.
Okay. All right, guys. This is like I said, we probably had another hour. We'd keep going. Thank you very much.